Hello once again, welcome to Herd Immunity News. I'm Marcus Botzer. Today it gives me great pleasure to welcome back onto the show Mr. Nick Tenconi, who is the interim leader for UKIP, United Kingdom Independence Party. This is the second time we've had this man back on the show. He is a revelation to many of us because he's actually out there doing things on the street and engaging with people in a peaceful, respectful, intelligent way. But without further ado, let me say, Nick, how are you today, sir?
Hi, Marcus. Thanks so much for having me back on. Yeah, I'm really great. Thank you.
Well, thank you for coming back on. And it's great that you've increased UKIP's visibility. And many people will know UKIP as United Kingdom Independence Party Brexit. A massive part of Brexit was, of course, immigration. We can talk about trade, we can talk about the bureaucracy of the EU, we can talk about all those things, but immigration is immediate to people. They cannot miss it. It's on their doorstep. Now, something that's really causing a few feathers to be ruffled right now in the Conservative Party and Reform Party is deportations. We've had Nigel Farage recently in an interview saying that he's not interested in talking about this, and this has got a lot of people very, very concerned that deportations might be off the table completely. Even a little backdrop into this, we've commented that under Labour, Tony Blair, David Blunkett as the Home Secretary, they were deporting 40 to 50,000 people in a legal way. They have the powers to do this even with the ECHR diktats. And now Robert Jenrick, the frontrunner for the Conservative Party in their leadership election, is talking about deportations. And over in America, President Trump is talking about millions of people being deported that are here illegally. What is your stance, please, and UKIP's stance on deportations?
UKIP's the party for deportations. There you go. That took 2 seconds. I don't know. I don't know why Nigel did that. It sort of started about Thursday of last week before the conference. The timeline is unacceptable for patriots and concerned citizens, and for those who are unashamedly right wing and who are Christian and who understand that we need to put Christianity back into the heart of government. It's absolutely unacceptable, but not surprising. It was the interview with Steve Edington, and Steve did a great job. I'm not sure why he didn't go a bit harder and ask why. Nigel responded, "You can't mass deport. Just forget about it. You just got legally, whatever. I don't know, madness. You can't do it." Simply not true. So my approach would have been, well, why can't we? Let's understand this, because obviously UKIP's going to be inundated with people saying don't split the vote and vote reform, and let's do a deal. And what these people don't understand is that Nigel doesn't want to do a deal. He's very unlikely to want to do a deal. Reform is very unlikely to want to do a deal. They're very authoritarian in that matter. Now, if they're authoritarian in the space that the party and myself operate in, then that's great. So we're going to pressure. The focus is getting our country back. But they're not authoritarian to the right or to the Christian vote. They're authoritarian to the liberal vote, to the establishment. That's what they do. That's constantly the message. That's constantly the branding. So there was an opportunity in that interview, which I think is quite important to highlight, is that I would have said, why? You're saying we can't mass deport. Okay, fine. That's just 14 years of the Tory government lying to us and saying that you can't do this because of ECHR and you can't do that because of lefty lawyers. It's all just nonsense. It's not true. Look at what happened during lockdown. Look at what happened with the riots in 2011 and now recently. If the government wants to act, it can act. If it wants to pass legislation, if it wants to repeal laws, it can do that. So let me be very clear to your listeners. If the government wants to do something, regardless of whether it's a dictatorship or a democracy, if it wants to do something, it can. It refuses to do so, which means either it's spineless or it's corrupt and it's being paid to. So let's ask Nigel the question, why can't we mass deport? The reality is that he wouldn't have had an answer to that. So UKIP's going to be the party of mass deportation. So let me answer the question in more of a broken down fashion. The reality is that the Conservative line of thought and policy and argument was that we need to curb immigration, and then you got things like net zero immigration, and this is from statisticians, this is from guys like Matt Goodwin, it's from all sorts of good people who just have this liberal line and this liberal rhetoric around reduction and curb and net zero. And of course, on the right, we are saying no, we need to deport X number of people, and I can break that down for you about who that would be. And that's a cost saving of X, not that it's about money, but obviously culture and money go hand in hand sometimes when you're serving the populace. Of course, you have to talk about bottom lines. So Reform and Nigel have got this opportunity to say to the world, to America, to the country, to Europe, no more zero tolerance policy. It's not, we are so far past being at the start of a war or in a war. Absolutely deportations. And instead, the timeline with Reform is more and more liberal, more and more establishment, and more, I want the centre ground vote. The Tory party's finished. You're going to have all these Tory, 100,000 or whatever at peak Tory members. I want that vote. I want to be Prime Minister. I want to get into the establishment. You can't get into the establishment unless you're part of the three-party system. That is so abundantly clear through Nigel and so High Command at Reform and Reform's policy. It is so abundantly clear from its messaging, from its manifesto. It is so clear. What more do people need to see, whether they're backing Reform, whether they voted Reform, whether they're paying Reform, i.e. through membership, whether they're a donor? What more do we need to see? So UKIP stance, you've got forecasted 1 million illegals in Britain. And some of them are in hotels. So you've got 100,000 in hotels. That's 8 million quid a day. It's an enormous amount to the taxpayer. We've got homeless veterans. We've got people in dire straits, old age pensioners who are going to freeze to death this winter. You've got 8 million quid a day being spent on around 100,000 illegals in our hotels, which further breaks down communities. It further disgruntles average Joe, you, me, just the average guy on the street. It further breaks our soul. It further breaks our spirit. 100K deported, military operation, no violence, no one's hurt. I wouldn't, if a soldier had an automatic rifle and I was being told to leave the country and I was being deported, I personally would do as I was told. But if they refuse, then that's on them. No different from getting on that dinghy in the channel. 100,000 deported. We've got up to 1 million illegals in Britain. So, but we don't actually know, because why would we know? So if you got 1 million, you might have more than 1 million. So you got 100,000 in the hotels deported. Simple. You've got up to 1 million in the UK deported. Simple. You've got 1.69 million legals in the UK currently claiming welfare, deported. Why are you here? Why are you claiming welfare? If you've come over to be with your spouse or to be with your family, you need to be sponsored. You need to be provided for. You need to be paid for. And then, of course, you've got I think it's 13,000, but I know it's 10,000 plus foreign nationals in our prisons deported. So net effect, you've got a cost saving of X number of billion. It costs 20.3 billion to prop up out of work migrants in the UK. So you've got a cost saving of around 20 to 25 billion just via deportation. And you've got it's the 100,000 illegals. It's up to the 1 million in society, and you've got the 1.69 million. So you're looking at what, 3 million to be deported. Now, if I can say it, other political leaders and politicians can say it. So I appreciate you allowing me to break it down, but your viewers and the wider world needs to hear this. You're talking about a cost saving of X and around about 3 million who should not be here. Done.
Well said. And I think your fastidiousness has to be saluted and respected, and taking the stance that you have. But we're even seeing Germany now closing their borders. We've seen this from Mr. Orban, Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary, get into trouble and be fined over his reluctance, quite rightly. And his mandate is exactly as you've said, to make sure there's no illegal immigration. And he's taken the European Union to court because, as you know, Nick, he's been fined 800 million approximately by the EU a year. He's challenging it in court, but he's happy to take the 800 million hit. We're taking something like a 5 billion pound hit. So I was just stunned. And then people in Reform are now, I'm not a member of Reform, I'm not a member of UKIP, just to let everybody know, I'm not a member of any political party, but I was stunned to hear Nigel Farage say that he doesn't want to talk about it. I mean, he doesn't want to talk about deporting anyone. Is this because he's looking to move his party to the centre ground?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's thrash this one out. every single opportunity that Nigel gets and Reform's High Command gets, every single opportunity they are given, they move to the centre ground. They alienate the right. They alienate the Christian right. They alienate the patriotic right. They alienate the culture first, economy second. We're at war. We want our country back. Enough is enough. Movement. Every opportunity they get, they prove themselves to be solely concerned with getting into the establishment and winning the establishment vote. That is demonstrable via the timeline from the last 12, 24 months. But what I would also say is this, in terms of people backing reform, it's not an anti-reform message. What it is that the vast majority, when you, as an activist, you have to understand what people are thinking. You have to understand what they're saying. You need to be in the comment section. You need to be engaging with people. You've got online activism. You've got, face-to-face activism. The vast majority of people will say, and it's almost like there's a little playbook script. They haven't been sent it by reform, but they've got it in their heads. I'm going to be very honest with you. 99% of people say Nigel's playing, item one, Nigel's playing the long game. You've got to remember the long game. You've got to remember optics, guys. It's quite infuriating people telling me, someone like me in my position, about optics. You've got to play the long game. Like, I don't know what that means. We're so far past being at war. What long game are they referring to? Kids being indoctrinated by Marxist far left teachers with satanic ideas on their children. The government now refusing freedom of information requests, and that's going to obviously just escalate with far left totalitarian statesmen like Keir Starmer. The rise of radical Islam and the Arabization of the West and of our towns and cities, Arab colonialism and imperialism, diversity, inclusion, and equality, and climate sanctions and climate agenda related fees and tariffs. What more do people, net zero, agenda 2030, what more do people need to see and feel around them in their communities, in their broken down towns, in the shanty towns, in the nonsense e-bike cultural just Deliveroo, Just Eat, Uber Eat? What more do people need to see that the establishment and liberalism is the source of our collective decline and downfall? What more? What long game, Marcus, are they referring to? Nigel's playing the long game. He's from 1993, when he co-founded and began UKIP. He became a leader in 2006. He's 60 years old now. He had a one policy issue within a party that he completely controlled. That one issue was never delivered. It's never been delivered. Anyone who voted Brexit all had culture first, economy second in mind. We're now worse off financially, potentially. There was always going to be a fallout, but we would make amends with that, because culturally we'd get our country back. We haven't. We're nowhere close to getting it. The Nigel / UKIP / Brexit Party / Reform brand has had tens of millions thrown at it. It's had endless media sensationalism, and it's got 30, 40 years of a man with that level of experience. And they returned 4 million votes and 5 MPs. And this is something that we're celebrating. So going back to the long game, what long game are people referring to? Because guys like me, yourself, millennials in their 30s and their 40s, the X's in their 50s, approaching 60s now. What long game? We've got this much time on planet Earth. And as for the Zeds, they're not getting on the housing ladder. Then the supply and demand issue, i.e. with uncontrolled mass immigration and being far too overpopulated in the country, they're not getting on the housing ladder. They don't care. They're just going to go and spend their money, because what difference does it make? Well, the I Hate Men campaign, you can't. It's very difficult now to find similarity with the two genders that are designed to complement one another. So the incentive at young, at middle, and at slightly older. What long game? What incentive do we have to want anything more from our country? What long game are people referring to? And then, of course, item 2 is the branding optics piece. Great move bringing Zia in, I hear, from the collective on the right.
Can I just sorry to interrupt you? Sorry to interrupt you, but for a long, long time, over Rishi Sunak's reign as Prime Minister, we heard Nigel refer to him as a former Goldman Sachs hatchet man, right? And now we have a former Goldman Sachs man as the chairman. I mean, does this not smell of rank hypocrisy?
Well, again, just what's happening. Speak to people that are backing reform. Ask them these questions. It's not vitriol from me. It's not an attack, and it's not an anti-reform message at all. Because half of the patriots want to unite the right, but unite with what? Reform are gunning for liberal votes. They're gunning to be perceived as a liberal party. So going back to that item 2, bringing Zia in, a lot of people on the right have said, "Well, that's a great move because he can't be accused of being
xenophobia or Islamophobia."
Well, it gets worse than that. So yeah, the first thing is he can't be accused of being Islamophobic, which isn't a word and it isn't a thing. Yes. He can't be accused of being a xenophobe, and he can't be accused of being Zionist either. So hang on a minute. So let me counter that. Zia is a member of Islam, as far as I'm concerned. It's a Christian country, and we need to put Christianity back into the heart of government. Again, I don't want to seem, forlorn and frustrated, but what more do reform voters need to see in terms of that timeline? And again, big business, the establishment's connection with big business as well. Well, what agendas are we talking about here? Going back to his critique of Rishi Sunak, does Nigel say what people want to hear and need to hear at that time? And then the shape shifting happens, and the tactics are deployed to and this, I guess, is item 3. We're not racist. Look, we've got a Muslim chairman. We're not hang on a minute. We're so far past being at war. The far left and the establishment and the liberal voter and those who are cucked to liberal narcissistic personality disorder and suffering greatly with the perceived moral superiority complex and the inherent need to virtue signal, they're going to come after you if you're not part of their authoritarian far left bubble, pathological illness. They're going to come after you no matter what you do. So let me get this straight. We're at war because of the establishment, because of liberalism, because of godlessness. We are fallen, and we are continuing to fall. And on top of that, you've got the diversity, inclusion, equality, race war, race baiting, the weaponization of race. So what's Reform and Nigel's plan? Is it to pander to this? Because if you do, you've got all these reform voters saying he's playing the long game. Hang on a minute. We want a politician saying it exactly as it is, a party saying it exactly as it is, its policy saying exactly as it is. And then once it's where it needs to be, it creates that change. So I'm very skeptical about any particular, at this stage, during peace times, it's maybe different, but I'm very skeptical about it at this stage. And I find it very, very annoying and very frustrating that we're still having to choke on this almost virus-like type thing where people say, give it a chance. They're a new party.
Okay, thank you for that very much. I'm sure our viewers and listeners will enjoy, get a lot from that. And as I say, this is definitely not an attack on reform. It's not an attack on anyone within that party, but it's your analysis, and we appreciate your frankness and your candour on that. But if we can just a little bit more on reform, then we need to move on to the Tories and the Labour Party, of course, because there's so much to discuss. But on the democratisation that the party have to have, they've updated us and told us that it's all been sorted now. Nigel's giving up his shares. I think he had 9 shares. There was another 5 to Richard Tice, and there was another member as well. So there's 16 shares altogether. Nigel's putting it back into the party, but people within the party have questioned this. Ben Habib, we've spoken to very recently, the former deputy leader of the Reform Party, and he's questioned this and saying, I'm sorry, it's not. Nigel's appointing the board, like the European Union used to appoint, or the Commission would appoint their specialists. So it's really, it's not all it seems. What are your impressions, please, of the democratisation of reform?
Well, all I know is that earlier this year, at the end of last year, there was a reform council. I think he was standing as a reform councillor, a guy called David Carpin. He was kicked out of the party because he posted 2 graphics on his Facebook timeline. One of them was a meme, so it was graphic of a road sweeper sweeping the pride flag into the drain, and the other one was it was the EU flag with the stars, but they were yellow swastikas.
Oh,
and he was kicked out of the party. He was kicked out of the party for that. Well, quite. He was kicked out of the party for that. And then, of course, we've got a guy called Bo who works at the Lotus Eaters. He was kicked out as well. I think this was before the local elections. It might have even been more recent. And again, he had a right of reply, and I listened to it. And again, I think he was having a dig at the Scots, actually, Marcus. So yeah,
they deserve it. They deserve it.
Well, so anyway, all of this stuff is fairly Mickey Mouse, and to be kicked out of a party over it, etc., party discipline. Then we've got Richard Shaw, who was booted out the other day, who was a spokesperson, I forget the name of the area now, slightly further up north, because he didn't even support Tommy Robinson. I think he came out with a reasoned and balanced viewpoint on it. He was kicked out. Ben Habib obviously was passed over. So that they could, Ben Habib was not just passed over, but so they could implement a Muslim chairman as well. And let's not forget also that Nigel, after the Tommy Robinson rally on the 1st of June, I want to say, he announced that he was going to become leader. And Richard, you take a back seat now. So maybe Richard was happy with that. Maybe he wasn't. But we're seeing all these different, what's it called? The democratization?
Democratization, where it's being given back to the members. So supporters, I should say.
Yeah, sure. So I think that it's more complex than that, though, because there's a timeline there that suggests that the party doesn't really have its act together. And again, I will say this: it's not a new party. It's not a new. The funding's not new. The party's not new. The Brexit party's not new. They've had an awful lot of time. It's just constant rebranding. I don't know how many times a political party needs to rebrand. So when we talk about the democratization, I'm not inside the tent, so I don't know exactly. I know the constitution's been written. And Ben Habib has critiqued that by saying that it actually means that Nigel still retains an awful lot of control. Now, I'm not here to bash Reform's constitution. And again, I'm not inside the tent. But what I do know is that you've got an entity like UKIP, for example, which is fully democratized. And that was obviously one of the predicates for me being a part of it. And I think it's really important. I really do. But I think more important than that is what high command is coming out with and saying, and what its policies are. So there's a lot of talk about the democratization of Reform at the moment. I don't know whether some of these democratization pieces are actually just, this is our excuse to get rid of certain people. So 2 days ago, Gwaine, I forget his surname off the top of my head, he was out of the party, and I don't know why. I think he was head of comms.
Dwayne Towler.
Towler, thank you. And
he's out.
Now he's very well respected and very well liked within the community. Man. Nice guy, etc. So I did my research into this. So again, it's kind of needs to be unpacked. What do they mean by democratization? And they talk about setting up local branches. Now they've got enough members to do that. This is all just part and parcel of what a party would do. As soon as UKIP goes back to where it was at the peak of its membership, just shy of 50,000, we'll be doing the same thing as well. And we've also got an infrastructure in place already. And we've got a few councillors and a few branches already set up, because obviously we're reigniting and we're rebranding the party and we're putting to right the wrongs of the last 8 years. So there's no real great shakes with that. My question just becomes, how long does it take? How many more millions do you need? Because they're after the Conservative vote, but the Conservative vote is always going to forgive the Conservatives. That's just what happens with Stockholm syndrome. It's just going to happen. The Conservative voters will always, and if Jenrick gets in, and if he gets his act together, as far as I'm concerned, you can't possibly be Conservative and a right winger or patriotic or Christian and vote Conservative or be a member. You just can't forgive them for the last 14 years. So there are people that will do that. So I don't really understand what the democratization piece means with Reform. They should have done it. They are doing it. And the fact they've done it means they've attracted a load of criticism as well. Something's not right.
Absolutely. And it's going to be up for scrutiny, because we really don't want to see Reform just create another 1922 committee, because the Conservative voters have really been cheated and betrayed all the way along the wings. When it came to the leadership election, for example, where Rishi Sunak lost, but then effectively the 1922 committee in the markets, the Bank of England, booted our Prime Minister out of office. But look, we appreciate your views and thoughts on that, but we'll move on to the next topic now. And nice segue in, the Tory leadership election. Right now, we've got the reborn Europhile, Mr. Robert Jenrick. He's come out and he's shaving his head. It's not as short as yours and ours yet, but he might get to that. He might even be sporting the beard very soon.
He's sporting the Hamas's terrorist organization jumper, isn't he?
Well, I'll leave that for you, sir. I'm interviewing you, and it's great that you're very honest with us. But what do you make of the Tory leadership campaign, and especially the front runner, most right wing of all the Tories? That's not saying much, Robert Jenrick.
It's a joke, absolute joke. Whole thing's a joke. The nail in the coffin for the vast majority of devout Conservative members and supporters was what they did to Suella. Sorry, I think it was Truss. The parachuting in of Rishi, what they did to Suella in October of last year after what we saw with the Islamist campaign to further undermine the West, further undermine Christianity, and further undermine Israel and the Jewish diaspora and population. Enough is enough. And then, of course, in March of this year, Rishi took to the lectern. I want to say it was March, and he had a chance, didn't he? After 7 or 8 months of the marches, hundreds of millions being pumped into the Palestinian solidarity campaign. No ceasefire, no appeasement. Look, guys, you've made your point. Now get lost. Look at what they're doing in Germany now with people who are supporting Palestine with regards to genocidal chants. As a Christian, I condemn the killing of innocents. Of course I do. And at the moment, Israel are coming under attack for going after Hezbollah. These evil, these demonic type of jihadi terrorists, they plant themselves into schools, they plant themselves into communities, they plant themselves into civilian population. So when you go targeted with your approach to kill, you get endless amounts of flack. And when you do it blanket, you get endless amounts of flack as well. So I'm sorry, but at some point the line's got to be drawn, and I'm loving what I'm seeing in Germany with regards to how that's being dealt with. Rishi had an opportunity to do that. Again, it was about March of this year. He didn't. He completely folded. Robert, it doesn't matter who. I backed Suella when I was part of the party, and I always promoted her.
Yep.
You should have a line of talent waiting to take the reins. You should have a line of Christian conservative talent waiting to take the reins. I don't see, as you said to your point just now, I don't see an awful lot of talent. CCHQ is a massive problem. What difference does it make if you put a guy like Jenrick in there? What difference does it make? None.
The head of the snake is still poisonous. And it doesn't really matter. He's just a functionary. And I think more and more people have seen through that now. But I could see from, say, like Ben Habib's point of view, he is taking a broad approach to at least have someone like Priti Patel. Now, I'm not a massive Priti Patel fan. I've never met her. I've never spoken to her privately. And you always get a different point of view. I have to trust people like Ben who say that one-to-one, she wants what we want as far as deportation is concerned, but she kept banging heads with this civil service, the real government. So you're absolutely right when you say it doesn't make a ha'porth of difference. But should we try to get more conservatives and back to the right? Should we even bother?
Yeah, that's actually quite a good question. So yeah, again, let me be really frank. I'm going to say there's two things that spring to mind, but I do it all. Liberal narcissistic personality disorder, cognitive dissonance, and Stockholm syndrome. There is some very, at the risk of sounding like a clinical psychologist, there is some very bizarre things happening in this country right now with regards to apathy, ignorance, beta male behavior, fear, silence. There's something happening. How can you still be a member of the Conservative? If you're a patriot, Christian Conservative, how can you be a member of the Conservative Party? Look, battle lines have been drawn. I don't even know what to say. I get it. If you want to belong to a party, belong to a party. But come on, 14. We're blaming Labour for everything now. What about the last 14 years under a liberal, left-leaning, conservative government?
It's called the Uni Party for a reason.
And then you mentioned the blob, you mentioned the civil service, which is the actual government as well.
Sue Gray, Dominic Cummings, same thing. Yeah,
it's just the whole thing. The whole thing needs to be declared and acted upon. All of it. And so anything coming out of any of the different parties on the right who dare move to the centre or who dare acquiesce or take the knee or in any way fold towards that liberal centre line. that's an automatic strike as far as I'm concerned.
That's it. Well, thank you for your views on that. And we're moving on now to the UK's relationship with the European Union. What we're seeing across in Europe is electoral success for National Rally with Ms. Le Pen. We've seen Giorgia Meloni cut her mass illegal immigration down by 60% because Italy last year was actually at 189,000. We think we've got problems, but obviously where they're located geographically, our ancestors are Italian. We're Italian of blood, you and I, Nick, and it's heartbreaking to see what's going on there, but Miss Meloni is trying. So there is a rise of the right wing over in Europe right now. Just as Keir Starmer takes over, we've got a extreme radical socialist globalist government, anti-British, seem to be anti-Christian as well. I'll just add that in there. What do you see as the relationship between the UK under Starmer and the European Union?
So, good question. I think that would the main thrust of that is would Starmer ever try and reverse Brexit? I think that's the first thing that comes up in those Brexiteer type circles. Yeah, he might. I don't know. Would he do it? Well, probably. I wouldn't put it past him. Would it concern me? Not really. Brexit, 8 years on, it didn't get done. Again, it had all the money, it had the vote, it had everything. It didn't get done. The establishment hasn't done it. So in terms of that, I don't really have anything left to say about it. We need to focus on Britain. In terms of Keir's relationship with the EU, I'm kind of tapped out with the European Union, Brexit. I'm in a particular consortium where we talk about the Brexit benefits. And if you look into it, Marcus, and I would encourage viewers to do that. If you put in Brexit benefits into Twitter in the search bar, you'll find there's all kinds of benefits in terms of trade deals and how
regulations.
How we can make ourselves slightly better off. The problem that I've got is that culturally, it's still game over in the UK at the moment. And I noticed that Tesco's have put their prices up as well. And so you've kind of got you've got a lot of foreign entities in the UK that can kind of do what they want and just jack their prices up all the time. So I'm thinking of, as myself, the common average Joe chap, I'm asking myself, how do they feel about our relationship with the European Union? How do they feel about Brexit? So what we're seeing in the right, and the Christian patriotic right in Europe, is they're saying, we really don't want to be part of the EU. We don't want to be part of this. We want to be self-governed, autonomous, sovereign nation states. And that is precisely the path that we need to go down and support with and stand in solidarity with and applaud and promote. You mentioned Orban, you mentioned Meloni. Europe was always going to move to the right and get things sorted and get the mass deportations underway and start drawing battle lines and spending more on defense. That was always going to happen because Europe's been hit so much harder than we have. But it's a slow burn process with mass uncontrolled immigration. So they need to keep doing what they're doing. We need to respect and admire and aspire to that. Let's say we're 5 years, 10 years behind, whatever. And again, UKIP's the party of deportation. So
well, that's something very much for our viewers and our listeners and your supporters to examine, because it's critical, especially when we see Keir Starmer go across and have a meeting with President Schulz, and he's talking about freedom of movement for Germans. Now, he shouldn't really be doing this because that's not for him to be doing. That's a European Union matter and issue. But it is concerning to us. I don't know how you feel about this, but what constitutes a German? Is that an illegal asylum seeker? Yes. Is it someone who'll be given a passport for Germany? Yes. So that means there will be freedom of movement for anyone under 30 under this arrangement that Keir Starmer is going to do with Germany. Are you concerned?
Yeah, massively. I suppose this is really the first point that I was saying. The establishment is going to do whatever it needs to do to keep furthering the trafficking of immigrants into the country, because somewhere, someone somehow is getting paid. And I don't mind saying that. There's no, unless it is just a satanic design to further destroy the soul of this country and our morale and our sense of belonging and identity, and there's no money involved. It's just an agenda. I highly doubt that. Someone's being the gangs, someone's profiteering off of the gangs and off of the trafficking. We were sold a lie with regards to doctors, engineers, surgeons, scientists. We were sold a complete lie, a complete lie.
Indeed. I mean, you brought up, well, now we're going to another level, right? We're going up. We're talking about religion. We're talking about people trafficking. We're talking about children being brought across. And as we've discovered, many people have looked into this. Not only are the adults undocumented, but they're coming across with children who are undocumented. And unless you know differently, there are no DNA checks and DNA blood type matches. The children could be orphans. The children could be distant family. Sometimes parents have got different blood types, for example.
Well, they've just grabbed them at the border for it. Let's just say it as it is. They've just grabbed them at the border potentially. You know, you never know. Or they've been sold to them. You know, you'll do because you look great. Having a kid with me looks really great, doesn't it? How do we know? How do we know? You're talking about an invasion. You're talking about an invasion. So I'm completely burnt out on the sort of, you know, Keir's and being uncomfortable with Keir and the freedom of movement. But again, being an activist, it doesn't just mean street level. It means online as well. And you'll see it on TikTok and you'll see it on Instagram. There are all of these Arab Muslim quite youthful people. They're not older. And they kiss their German passport saying, I'm a German citizen now. And they're speaking in German. I'm a German citizen now. And so now what we've done is we've gone into this very uncomfortable and horrible realm, which one piece of credit to Generic I will give him. And that is, what is it to be English? What is it to be British?
Yeah.
What about our identity? What about our sense of belonging? It's not racist to discuss that at all. It's not extremist to discuss that at all. What is it? If you're coming here and calling yourself British, but you don't believe in democracy, you aren't Christian, you don't believe in the rule of law, you don't believe in freedom of speech, you are pushing a different secular sectarian agenda, well, that's hugely problematic then, isn't it? Because we've already got that and we've seen that it simply doesn't work. It's divisive and it ultimately, I believe, leads to our downfall as well. So I'm hugely concerned about anything that Starmer comes out with, especially with regards to his relationship with the European Union and what he might or might not try and pull off. It should be deportations from all the different parties right now. It should be deportations.
Absolutely. And on the back of what you're saying about that, there seems to be a protection of, for example, Rochdale, the rape gang leader. Forgive me if I get this wrong, please, Nick, but Kawari Abdul Rauf, whose deportation as a Pakistani was curtailed by his lawyers because Pakistan refused to take him back. There's also the Eritrean who's in the news just this week, who his lawyer also spoke up for him and said that he's a rapist, and if he went back, he may face being punished and also military conscription. So on the back of that, what it looks on the face of it is that the Home Office of the United Kingdom care more about protecting rapists and paedophiles than they do our own women and children. Are people not getting this, Nick?
Well, it gets a lot worse than that. So let me draw your attention to the ITV news last night at 10 p.m. You might have watched it, and some of your viewers may have watched it. Again, it's a waste of time watching legacy media news at 10 or whatever you want to call it. It is every single time. It is the I Hate Men campaign will be there. The anti-white, anti-Christian rhetoric. Every single news segment. It's almost like they've got a sort of technique to deliver subliminal, because sometimes they're overt and sometimes they're covert. Now, the main thrust was about non-violent sex crimes. And of course, it was women coming forward saying that the most awful things had happened to their families. Okay. And Sarah Everard was brought up as well. Well, we can all agree that policing is nowhere near tough enough. It's nowhere near up to snuff, and that links to our judiciary and our two-tier policing. So I'm watching the segment, and I'm just there, and it's awful. It really is. We it's all in our manifesto. We need to be a lot tougher, and we need to make sure that the most vulnerable within society are protected. Then there was a different element to the segment, which basically it was just pure I hate men. It was pure I hate men. And it just lends itself to the fact that the group of women who are pushing this narrative this I hate men narrative, and men are now terrified to do anything. I mean, most single eligible bachelors probably would be terrified to even approach a woman now. And of course, that's how courting begins, because you have to take charge and lead and behave like a gentleman. And I'm worried about that for the Gen Zs, and I'm worried about that for some of the younger men within society. So on the one hand, there's a huge focus on the hatred of men, or misandry for your viewers. There's a huge focus on that, and the vilification of men, rather than saying, if someone's flashed you, you need to call the police. You used to call them flashers. If someone's behaved like that, you need to call the police. This is what needs to happen. But there's a tone there of what we need to do just to highlight just how vile and awful men are. And I'm really sick of it. Now let's turn that and let's map it onto what you're talking about with regards to the safety and the protection of women
over and above sexual predators from abroad.
Let's talk about the grooming gangs. Let's talk about Hugh Edwards. Let's talk about the sentiment in the ITV piece last night was, and there was a superintendent, chief constable, or something like that, and the theme was all about nipping it in the bud. When these people behave, they start with flashing, or these degenerates, they do whatever they do. You got to nip it in the bud, okay? Because then they then go on to commit the most heinous of crimes. I agree. If someone breaks the law or behaves inappropriately or indecently, you should call the police. Okay. Now let's take the outrage there and let's map that onto what these same people think about the grooming gangs, about Hugh Edwards completely getting away with it, about pedophiles and rapists being let out of jail early, about sorry, one second, Marcus. Going back to your point as well about mass uncontrolled immigration and the various different people who are unchecked, undocumented, who then go on to commit the most heinous of crimes. It doesn't add up, does it? There has to be some sort of balance within society where we turn our heads to the most prevalent, the most awful, and the most heinous. And we say, right, actually, we probably want to deal with that as a priority, whilst managing expectations across the board. If someone breaks the law, or if you feel unsafe, or if you feel like something bad's going to happen, you should call the police. So I'd like to tie those 2 points in specifically, because I just saw it last night, and it kind of linked to a few other bits and pieces that you've mentioned there about protecting women and children. The narrative needs to change, and we need to highlight the nature of the two-tier policing without fear or favor, and the two-tier judiciary, because it really is a national disgrace.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great to hear someone in politics actually taking it to that level, because we're looking at almost apologists for paedophilia. We got 1 million views on a tweet that we sent out last year from a guest on GB News talking about sympathy, having sympathy. Her name is Amy Nicole Turner, I believe her name is. And quite repugnant person, to be honest with you. And this is the sliding scale that we're worried about. There are groups out there linked to the Labour Party that have spoken out for paedophile inclusion. And this seems to be the slippery road that this diversity and inclusion insanity is going down. And as I said to Ben Habib yesterday, I said, how can you be a united country if you preach diversity? Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, going back to the example of Hugh Edwards, on the case at the time, a lot of lawyers tend to jump in on the comments to just put everyone, because the focus here should be on litigation and what the lawyers are saying. Look at the riots, look at the sentencing that's been handed out recently, look at the example that people have been made out of. So we really should focus on this. A lot of the people at the time who are QCs or qualified, they were jumping in the comments saying, look, the reality is that everyone's outraged about what's happened with Hugh Edwards. The truth is, in terms of the legal justification and the legal note, actually this is standard operating procedure in terms of what he's done, in terms of what he's been, and you think to yourself, I don't understand what's happening then. So it's the same when Tory politicians defend mass uncontrolled immigration and illegal immigration. It's got nothing to do with us, it's the law. So actually, and again, I'll just bring in the jihadi element as well. These jihadi lawyers are so very well trained, specifically in human rights, specifically in UN. Again, they're so specialized and so well trained. They are it's no different from me identifying an area in the UK that loves fresh bread, and I go and up a bakery on the high street opposite rows of houses in a ward of 3,000 people that just want fresh bread. The appetite and the need is there, and all these people have got to do in these little offices on these little high streets is just become a world class. The Shabima Begum, forget the lawyer name with him. He's the most high profile jihadi lawyer. All they've got to do is just within their circles, within Islamic networks and circles and WhatsApp groups, which they're everywhere, and I know that for a fact. All they've got to do is just send a message out through the mosques or through the groups, and one of these guys, same with Batley Grammar and the mobilization there, and also the 2018 scandal at the school near Huddersfield, where the young white lad was accused of waterboarding the Syrian refugee. These people are weaponized and mobilized and ready to move in a litigious sense at any opportunity with regards to protecting their own and the scandals that go with it. This is hugely problematic because it lends itself to the argument that, okay, fine. So we're so tied up in laws, left-wing laws, diversity, inclusion, equality laws, ESG laws, corporate and social responsibility, CSR. We're so tied up. We talk about bureaucracy, we talk about the blob. We are so tied up in laws now. And that goes for all sorts of things like self-defense, if someone was to break into your home and things like that. We're so tied up now in rights of the individual and laws that it seems like actually we need to get rid of or redact an awful lot of these laws. And that's right at the heart of UKIP's manifesto. When you read through it, and I advise your viewers and everyone else to please do that, and don't take my word for it.
We'll leave the link to that. It's
filled with what we should repeal, what we should add in, or what we should change. It's there. It's policy heavy, you know. So yeah, it's quite, when you go into the legal side and legal realm of all of this, it is quite nauseating because average Joe like you and I, even politicians, mathematicians, scientists, we can all potentially add a lot of value. But when it comes to the letter of the law, the vast majority of us aren't trained in that specialism. But those specialisms and that funnel in society, it only exists because the laws are currently in place. Something's got to be done about that.
Something's got to be done about it, yes. And we see the new Lord Chancellor, Shamima Mahmood. We see her in a mosque apologising for the riots. Now, that's fair enough if you want to go out and reach out to communities and say that I'm apologising. But she's then for apologising on behalf of who? On behalf of people who are innocent, people who have nothing to do with that, people who have got problems and concerns with unlimited, uncontrolled mass immigration, especially when it threatens our national security. But where is the balance, I ask of you, please, Nick? Where is the balance to all of the victims of people who have come across and they are the victims of radical Islamists? Wouldn't it be balanced and wouldn't it be sensible? But obviously we know the answer to that. It's not going to happen, is it? We're seeing this two-tier, but I'm alarmed to see that someone is there in their costume, their hijab, whatever she's wearing, and it just adds grist to your mill.
Yeah, it's a declaration of war, and this is very important. And again, this is directly in our manifesto. You won't find it in Reform's pledge or whatever they call it. You simply
there won't be a declaration of a holy war. No.
You simply won't find it in there. And there'll be no messing around.
Not Zia's speech. No.
You at the Reform conference, anything about radical Islam. I've checked through the speeches. Now, if I'm wrong, I need someone to send it in the comments here. I look for anything about radical Islam and anything about Christianity. So please, someone prove me wrong. Send it to Marcus or send it to me. Put it in the comments. I've looked, can't find it.
In a nutshell, we've got a couple of minutes left, but in a nutshell, you're talking about lawfare, weaponization of the courts against people like you and I, and you're also talking about blasphemy laws being brought in, not against Christianity, because we're still arresting people outside abortion clinics, well outside exclusion zones. That's just one example. But look, you're into, and we really admire you for this, you're out there actively. You're peacefully working with the police and working with the authorities. You've let them know that you're going to be there. You're following all the guidelines and all the rules. Both you and I repudiate all violence, just as is written in the Italian constitution. Anybody got any complaints to make, you go to the authorities, you don't take it up with your fists. Getting attacked, different position altogether. There are ways and means, of course, within the law that you can protect yourself, and the British public should know that.
Of course.
But in a nutshell, if people are interested in you and UKIP, what's the next step for them? And keep them on the right guidelines, please.
So there is only one thing that someone in my position as leader of a national party can say at this stage. We are not at war. We are the war has started. We are past that. So you need to choose a side. That's where we're at now. You need to choose a side. What's and my point is, what's the alternative? Going back to what I said earlier about the long game. You need to pick a side. That means you need to put your faith and your trust and your support in the party of your choices, missions, its manifesto, and its high command. Now, if XYZ ticks the box for you, good luck and God bless. If it's myself and if it's UKIP, good luck and God bless. There's no bad blood there. We all want a better future for our children, and we all want to be able to provide for our elders, our families, etc., etc. But it's now time to pick a side. There can be no more sitting on the fence. It has to be, what are the missions? What's the manifesto saying? And do we believe in high command? That's it. What are they saying? From UKIP's side, it's to declare war on far left extremism and far left totalitarian propaganda, to declare war on radical Islam. And the 39,000, going back to your point a minute ago about our Justice Secretary at the moment, 39,000 of the 45,000 on MI5 watch list are Islamist suspects or Islamists. Detain and deport where possible. Declare war on woke, on Marxism in our institutions, in the civil service, place Christianity back into the heart of government, mass deportations, build a seawall, spikes in the English Channel, stop the boats coming over. If the law can't be undone, all right, fine, let's build a seawall. In terms of what's here that's illegal, those 3 million that I forecasted, mass deportations. It's time to pick a side, Marcus, because it's got to play the optics game and you've got to play the long game. It's getting boring. It's getting tiring. We are so far past that point now. In 5 years' time, we are voting our way out of this. And it should be a Christian, right-wing, patriotic vote that has the fearless leadership at the helm and the policy nuts and bolts and the manifesto and its missions in the heart of government in 5 years' time. And we're going to reclaim our country because we say enough is enough.
Absolutely. And the viewers will enjoy that as bringing it to a conclusion. But from our point of view at Herd Immunity News, obviously your door is open electorally to everyone and anyone, regardless of colour, regardless of creed, regardless of religion. You're talking, from what we can garner without putting words into your mouth, about people coming to the UK and taking part within a Christian country. Their faiths notwithstanding will be accepted, but obviously people have to come here to accept our traditions, our laws, our cultures, our values. And of the Muslim faith, which we have spoken about, this is for us as much as everybody else. We're not talking about peaceful Muslims that abide by the law, that respect their neighbours. We're talking about terrorists here that are unlawful, deadly, and should not be here. Is that fair, sir?
Yeah, absolutely, it's fair. A person's timeline nowadays will show demonstrably their actions, their words, their interviews. There's no hiding. There is absolutely no vitriol or suggestion towards peaceful Jews, peaceful Muslims, peaceful Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists,
Catholics,
atheists,
Protestants, yes,
Catholics, Protestants, agnostics. It's no one's ever going to find anything racist or anti when it comes to the peaceful, moderate, love thy neighbor. I respect that this is a Christian country. I'm pro free speech. I'm pro democracy. No one's going to find anything on myself or the party in high command. Now, obviously, when it comes to individuals in the party, that's why you have this thing called party discipline, and we'll manage that closely going forward. There can be no misinterpretation. Islamists and the Islamist agenda, which is the caliphate, the spread of the politico and religio establishment and furtherment and betterment of the Islamic faith. It's all there in the Oxford Dictionary. You can find it yourself. Please Google it if you're so afraid or unsure or confused. Please go and Google the difference between Islamist and member of Islam. It's that simple. We've had high command within MI5 call it out. We've had politicians like Suella Braverman call it out. We've had politicians and prime ministers like David Cameron call it out. Out of the 45,000 on MI5 watch list, 39,000 are Islamists. And okay, we could go into the talk about Islamism separately,
Yeah.
but to be immaculately clear, I will never get tired of doing it. No one is talking about peaceful, moderate, ordinary men and women of whichever faith. We're talking about the radicals. We're talking about the jihadis. They've got to be stopped.
Exactly. And we just put that in there so that there can be no misinterpretations or ambiguity, sir. And in this day and age, unfortunately, because the way that we operate, these interviews are watched very closely by people, and they're happy to watch it. We wish them all well and a Merry Christmas, or a Happy Hanukkah, or whenever it comes, or the religious festivals. We do, and we don't have to. As I say, anyone can check your timeline. They can check our timeline. Great distinction between radical Islamists and peaceful, law-abiding British Muslims, or wherever they may come from. We wish nothing but the best for them and everybody else in this country. And we wish the best to you. All that remains for me to say, sir, is thank you very much, Nick Tenconi, the interim leader of UKIP. Hopefully you will be the leader in full when that is announced in due course.
God willing.
And look forward to having you back on. Thank you very much, Nick.
God bless. Thank you, Marcus. Thank you so much.